Welcome back, and I know it's been some time since I uploaded the last video, but I don't know, the wedding shopping is just tiring. I do not get time to record, plus I've been traveling way too much. Now, I do understand that in the last video I said that we'll start deep diving into each and every part of a supply chain, starting from suppliers, but when I revisited the video, or sort of when I was editing the video, I realized that there's still a few things that I think we need to learn in at the overall supply chain perspective before we start deep diving. Now, taking a step back, what the supply chain perspective means, it's basically like, if I were to put it in the easy words, it's how can you represent supply chain. Now, the very first view that anyone would understand is through a map view, which essentially means, let's say here's a map, right? Here's uh, North and South America. You have somewhere here Europe, you have Asia, here Australia, Antarctica, Africa, somewhere here, right? All of this is here. What this means is you are mapping your product, all the materials from where it arrives to your manufacturing location. Let's say it's being manufactured in India over here. So whatever comes from here, it comes here, you show the map, and then you show where it is going. Now, the reason this is like the famous view of representation, or at least one of the famous view for representation, is it essentially highlights all the risk, all the geographical risk that a supply chain faces, and also gives you a very clear picture of which part of the world are you very much concentrated on, and in case there's a need to sort of find alternatives, which part of the world can you go to. Now, the next one is the chain or web. It's essentially what we discussed in the first video, which means that you have all your different processes. For example, you start from supplier and you end up to the customer or retailer, let's say, for example, in this case. And now I do not want to spend too much time understanding what these two are, because this one is very simple, and this one we have more or less understood in the first video. Now, today we're going to focus more on the cycle view, and then what is the systems perspective, because this is something which I think lays foundation of next couple of videos. Now, if I were to just do this. All right, coming on the cycle view. Now, what does the cycle view means is, everybody, like each one of us, faces every day. For example, let's say there's a customer. Let's go back to the same ice cream example that we have been using for now. So let's say so we all know that there's a cycle between the customer to retailer, and then here to this. Now, what does it mean is, I'm a customer, and the retailer is a B&M, which means brick and mortar, which means a retail store, which is offline. So let's say there's a customer, the cycle between a customer and retailer, and it's called a customer order cycle, which means that customer places an order, pays money, retailer delivers goods, or in this case, an ice cream. This is called a customer order cycle. Now, there's similar order that retailer places with the distributor, which is called, do you want to guess? Okay, if you were able to, then it's good. Otherwise, it's called a replenishment cycle, which means, again, order, money, goods. Similarly, we have a distributor between a cycle between distributor and manufacturer, which is distributor, order, money, goods. It's called, you're right, manufacturing or manufacturer cycle. The last one is manufacturer to supplier, supplier to manufacturer. Now, I want you to guess what this one is. Well, if you were able to, it's fine. Otherwise, it's called procurement, because manufacturer is procuring the raw materials here, right? So this is more or less what the cycle view means across different elements or different parts of the entire supply chain. Now, there are a couple of things that I don't know, you would logically know, but still, it's my job to just sort of reiterate on it. For example, let's talk about the order size, right? Which is a very important metric in any of the supply chain systems, which means that a customer from a retailer might at best get one ice cream, or let's say they're taking a pack of 12 ice cream, but that's it. On the other hand, when retailer places an order with distributors, it could be cartons. or even like, I don't know, like there's a truckloads of it, right? When distributor has to sort of fulfill this carton base, it is going to order, let's say, even like great. So this one was a smaller delivery truck. We'll assume this one is a huge ass delivery truck, train loads or anything. So basically what I'm trying to say is, even if there's a very small demand here, there's an effect that makes this one demand multiple folds by the time it reaches supplier. What this effect is called, it's called bullwhip effect. Now, of course, we'll discuss this later, but the idea of the bullwhip effect is essentially that a small trigger here in terms of order would result in different level of magnitude in terms of impact by the time it reaches upstream. Yeah, I just realized I introduced maybe a new term, which is upstream and downstream. So upstream means going from customer back to supplier, and downstream means going from supplier to customer. But yeah, right now where we are, I think this much, just understanding what it means principle wise should be fine for the bullwhip effect. Now, the something like the perspective or the view of a supply chain that is very much, or I think most important for us or anyone who's trying to get into supply chain or who works in supply chain might agree, is the systems perspective. Now what does this mean is, everybody, like whenever you meet someone, they'll tell you that supply chain is a combination of system. Now what does that mean is, what you see over here is customer service, transportation, order processing, material handling, inventory management, warehousing, purchasing, and okay, let's put retailer. I've put it in a different color for a reason. Put it, let's still keep it, but yeah, there's a retailer. Now what does a system perspective means, that all of these functions are a part of the system that makes sure that the entire supply chain is running. So these are the different functions under supply chain system. And the reason we need to understand, or rather why are these important, let's say there's an example, right? Let's say you and let's just pick one of these, like one of these. For example, let's say we'll pick transportation as a function. Now let's say there's an objective function that the transportation people are trying to meet. Is objective is essentially, we need to reduce lead time. Or let's say, no, let's not go into lead time, it's too quick for that. Let's say there's a cost reduction objective that the transportation people have. The constraint is, you can get only product from X and Y, and then you have to make sure, and of course there's a cost associated. X charges this, Y charges this. How do you make sure that your cost is reduced while making sure that nothing in the system moves? Now this gets even more complicated when, let's say, dealing with both transportation and customer service, which essentially is, let's say all the objective function is same, but there's a constraint for us, which means that the service level always should be 95%. Like 95% of the order should always be on time. This gets even more complicated. Let's say, for example, I have warehousing in this, right? Now the constraint that we can add from the warehousing point of view is, let's say we have two warehouses of ours, which is A and B. The capacity is, it can only hold 1500, it can only hold 1300. Now the demand towards the end you're trying to fulfill is, I don't know, 2200. The distance between this and the retailer shop is something, and this is where the retailer comes in. Let's say there's, now we're dealing with both retailer and warehousing. So the distance between this and this is something, this and this is something. The cost per kilometer between these two is very different. So how do you meet your objective of reducing your cost, or getting products delivered at the lowest cost possible, while also having all these constraints? So this is what I mean when I say that this is the systems perspective, that you're dealing with different functions across supply chain, which are very much important and which will mostly be almost every time associated with each other. They will have their own constraint, and how do you come to a very optimal solution of delivering products? Sometimes the objective is related to cost, sometimes it might not be, sometimes it might just be we don't care about the cost at this point, our service level should be this. Or it could be that we don't care, but there's a constraint. For example, in this one, right, like we are solving a problem, but later you realize that sorry, after you've solved the problem, right, you know that okay, you can get x from here, no, sorry, a amount from x, b amount from y, but then you realize that at some point in time b shuts down. So how do you manage, how do you work around all of this? So this is called the systems perspective, in which you are evaluating every function individually while also tying up with the different functions across the supply chain system. But yeah, I think this is more or less what I wanted to talk about, the supply chain perspective or views. Just, the idea was to introduce how can you represent supply chain in different ways. Now, I know this is something that might have, seemed interesting and practical, that hey, how do we solve it in real life? Of course, there are different tools that do that, because it's way more complicated than what I put here. And also that you can do it in Excel, but I do not have any way to show you in Excel. So what I'm going to do is use the old method of solving equations, but let's try to solve at least one objective in next video, where I'll try to put in at least one or two of these constraints, and then we solve it and arrive at an optimal solution using just pure math and logic. So stay tuned. I hope this was helpful. In case you have anything that you would want me to cover going forward, or is there anything that interests you outside of this, but anything in the corporate life, feel free to send your questions. I will love to answer them. But tab tak ke liye, stay happy, stay healthy.